Yep. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, for those who don't know me, my name's Miguel. I'm a sysadmin consultant, mainly to other Drupal shops. I'm an eager developer, so do a lot of deployment stuff like we were talking about in the last talk. More and more I find myself spending a lot of time thinking about security-related issues. So that's what this talk is about. It's about the product called OSSEC, Open Source Intrusion Detection System. It's a bit of a wordy title there, but I'm going to talk about two main areas: intrusion detection and response, and also how OSSEC can be used to do system and log analysis of Drupal sites and servers. So beyond just intrusions and more about whatever the hell's going wrong on your servers or your sites or third parties that you depend on and so on. So I'm going to start by asking, have you looked at your logs recently? And I mean really, really look at them. Share a bit of a backstory. In November 2012, I was working on a Drupal site, an Australian Drupal site, processes a lot of payments and interesting things. And I think I was just arsyncing the assets or something to staging environment or something, and I came across these files under site's default files with .php extensions, and straight away I thought, that's weird. I normally see PHP files in the files area, you know, especially not ones that, you know, WTM something or other, and there was one called WP-conf. So that's WordPress. This is a Drupal 7 site. What's going on? In closer inspection, they turned out to be what's known as the C99 or R57. There's heaps of different names for it. It's kind of off-the-shelf PHP-based backdoor hack. So if the attacker loads it in the browser, he gets a nice little dashboard. He can sort of browse around the server, access files, upload more malware, connect to databases, a database console thing there. Quite a nifty little hack, actually. And this little log snippet here is actually looking at the logs. This is about 4th of November. I think I discovered it on like the 10th or something, so I was pretty lucky. It wasn't even a full week later, but it was completely by chance. I wasn't actively looking at logs. I had nothing looking at logs for me. And so you can actually see here the attacker does a sort of post request, something to do with CK editor, and then immediately does a GET request of a file, and he gets a code 200 response. So he used that post request, exploited a vulnerability in the CK editor module, or at least the library in the module. When combined with the fact that PHP core module is enabled on the site, he was able to execute arbitrary code and upload a file. And then he was able to actually browse the file, like Drupal actually served the PHP to him due to a Drupal core bug, which is the second link at the bottom, which we discovered directly out of this hack. The htaccess file in Drupal is meant to stop a PHP file from being executed in the files directory. Didn't work. It hadn't worked for years, basically. So, yeah, really nasty. And it was just something like that. And earlier in the logs, there was sort of other attempts to try and hack, which, if I had something looking at the logs for me, I could have detected it in advance or maybe blocked it in time or something. It caused no end of pain. You had to do a complete server reinstall. This site happened to be storing encrypted credit card numbers in the database that also had the AES decryption key on the server. He could easily have read it, the attacker, if they wanted to. So lots of problems. So looking at logs. Your server is probably full of logs. Obvious examples being the Apache logs. So if you look at them, you're going to see things like crawlers, hunting for holes, 24/7. If you look at your logs, I guarantee you're going to see this sort of stuff. Brute forcing of user password, user/register, trying to log into your site, usually spam bots trying to get around captures and stuff by registering to your site. You'll also see error 500, internal server errors, gateway timeouts, all sorts of stuff, or worse. That's in your Apache logs. In your syslog, especially if you're logging Drupal's watchdog messages to the syslog, which I recommend anyway, for other reasons. I think by default it logs to the database logging module in core. Turn that off, you'll probably get performance benefits as well on a busy site. If you're logging your Drupal logs to syslog, you're going to see stuff in more detail around some of that brute forcing, like messages saying login attempt failed for whoever, PHP exceptions, maybe permission problems, software crashes, kernel panics, other types of timeouts, as well as things like external services. I've seen when Molem goes down, the Molem module does HTTP requests. If the Molem service is actually down, your site might actually be blocked from loading because of this spinning, trying to talk to Molem. And you can uncover a lot of information like that from the syslog. Payment gateways are down or something. Or one payment gateway issue I saw once where it went into production with the test mode still on, and no actual payments going through, but everything was okay apparently until we looked at the logs. The auth log is another good one. Anytime someone SSHs to your server, you're going to see people logging in, users adding or being removed from groups. Any use of sudo, someone goes and hacks core in production and does so using sudo, you're going to see something in the auth log about that. So there's a lot of stuff being logged automatically on your servers, which means they're probably useful things to be watching. But attacks are just one form of risk, and that's really what most of this talk is going to be about. There's intrusions, there's hacks and so on, but there's also other types of risk which can be perhaps just as bad. Bad practice, pushing bad code, for example, human error. As I said, dependent services, various packages being installed or removed from your system because you're not using Puppet or something. All of this stuff gets logged. All of it can have impact if you don't have enough, oversight or jurisdiction on what's happening on your servers. And all of this stuff is often in the logs. Some things aren't in logs, like more bad practice than human error. Setting bad permissions on something. I've seen so many developers do just a recursive chmod 777 everything, and it fixed the problem. Great, let's move on. Now you've got new problems. So unexpected modifications. Back in 2012, there was like a nasty Plesk hack which allowed installing of malicious Apache modules, so sort of binary modules into Apache that injected nasty iframes and stuff into pages just randomly. And some of this stuff doesn't leave any trace, other than the fact that something is there that didn't used to be, but it might not actually be logged, which is a big problem. So most of my talk is going to be about what is actually security. And when that hack happened to me in 2012, I was like, I need to be told about these sorts of intrusions. I need something to be looking for intrusions, and started looking for software, which is when I came across OSSEC. But very quickly I realized that, as I said, that type of intrusion is just one sort of problem. And I've been working with a lot of companies lately who are trying to get certification in things like ISO 27001. It's a big information security sort of certification, lots of auditing and so on. And so I'm seeing a lot of these sort of buzzwords flying around at the moment. But security is not just intrusions, it's anything that can compromise availability of your service or the integrity, corruption, database corruptions and so on. Reliability, so maybe it doesn't perform so well, your site. That can lead to loss of trust in your user base or your customers, which can lead to loss of money. So it helps to start thinking about security as beyond just the typical stuff. And what to do about it. And that's, when I discovered OSSEC and started playing around with OSSEC, and I realized it can help me with a lot of these issues beyond just the typical script kiddie. So OSSEC, that's the website. It is a free and open source host-based intrusion detection system, or HIDS, I guess for short. Host-based means it runs on your actual servers, so it's running within your OS. It's not something doing deep packet inspection, not like the stuff that you'd run on routers or firewalls and so on. I think it came around in about 2004 by some other company, and then that company was acquired by Trend Micro in 2009. Fortunately, it stayed open source. 2.8 just came out. 2.7 was around for ages. 2.7 was around in 2012, so it's a bit of a slow release cycle, which shouldn't be anything strange to any of you using Drupal. And like Drupal, there is an active development happening. There's quite a good community. The mailing lists are quite responsive, and they're on GitHub and so on. In terms of installation, it's pretty straightforward. There's just a tarball. You download it. You run the install script. That's basically it. I do have a little wrapper script which you can use. It doesn't do anything other than it does the checksum verification of that tarball. Saves you a bit of time. It's not in Debian yet. There aren't really many deb packages around. There is an Ubuntu PPA. If you're using Ubuntu, you can speed up the installation a bit if you're using packages, but I think it'll end up in Debian maybe in 10 years or so, the next Debian release. Cool. The OSSEC model, I guess in terms of how you can install it in your infrastructure, there's several different ways. Probably the most popular way is the server agent model. So if you've ever used anything like Puppet, you've got a Puppet master and Puppet agents talking to the master. OSSEC is very similar. You basically just deploy OSSEC to a server. You can centralize your config there, drop a little lightweight agent on all your other servers, and they're going to ship their logs back to the main server, and has a bunch of convenience and features that come with that, such as propagating change out to your agents, or active response, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is like blocking attackers across your network. There's also local mode if you just want to try it out, or if you've just got one server, you can just install it in like a sort of standalone mode. I actually have it running in standalone mode on my Mac. So it does run on OS X as well as Linux and Windows as well, I think. I just downloaded the tarball and ran it. You probably need Homebrew or something because you need to have compilation stuff. Yeah. So that's good as well. There's also a hybrid mode, which I've never looked at. I think it's much more made for complex environments with lots and lots of servers, or servers behind DMZs and stuff. So you can, I think the agents can ship their logs to a hybrid server, which can then ship that stuff onto a server elsewhere. Much more complex. I don't need anything that complex myself. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the main features of OSSEC, and there's about 4 main features. The first one is log analysis. So that's all about what's happening right now on the servers. So OSSEC is going to be quite literally watching all your logs on your servers, as many as you want, a whole heap of them out of the box, to see in real time what's happening, and it can sort of respond in real time, send you emails, and take other action. The next feature is syscheck. So that's what we call integrity checking. So that's looking at what's actually changed, what's happened that's left traces on your system. The most common example being, files have been modified of some sort. So they might be config files or binary files that have changed for some reason. Syscheck is going to tell you about that. It keeps a sort of internal record of MD5 sums and this sort of thing. The third feature is root check, so that's rootkit detection, very much like Rootkit Hunter if you've used that. Also does some things that Rootkit Hunter doesn't do, which we'll go into. And the fourth one is the most interesting one, that's active response. So that's what to do about problems, particularly around log analysis. So if an attacker comes in, tries to do stuff on my site, how can I respond to it? You know, I'm not awake 24/7 usually, but attacks are 24/7. So you need to have something that can respond even in your absence to potentially mitigate a threat, at least until you wake up. So, log analysis, what's actually happening? The way it works is through two systems, decoders and rules. So, all sorts of programs on your servers log in different ways. They log in, like their log messages look different. They might structure, you know, whether they have timestamps or whether they include IP addresses and so on differently, unfortunately. It'd be nice if we could standardize on this sort of thing, but in order to make OSSEC effective and be able to understand different types of logs, it needs to understand different types of logs. So it does that with decoders. They're essentially just regex patterns for different types of logs, just to be able to extract bits of information like timestamps and IPs and so on. Once it has analyzed a log message, it's then able to run a whole heap of rules across that message to see if it matches anything. And if it does find a match for any particular rule, such as maybe brute force attack or something, it can grade them in terms of level. So certain things that happen are maybe not a threat, but they might be bad. They get a sort of lower level. Some things are really, really bad. They get a higher level. And obviously, yeah, the higher the level, the worse it is. OSSEC can react differently in terms of that threshold.
So do they come pre-configured?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that comes out of the box. There you go. So yeah, once you install it, you straight away get a whole heap of preset decoders and rules with pretty same defaults. Some of them I've found I've tuned, but mostly it's pretty good. So any sort of SSH brute forcing, if you can't lock down port 22 or whatever you use, it's able to interpret dictionary attacks against SSH, as well as when someone logs in for the first time. First time user logged in, send you a message, which can be interesting if you weren't expecting someone to log in and they did. First time anyone ever used sudo, that gets sort of logged. If you're running an SMTP service, that's another thing that often gets sort of dictionary attacks trying to break SASL passwords and so on, as well as, of course, Apache or Nginx logs, the 400s to the 500s. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good out of the box. The stuff that doesn't come out of the box, you can also write your own decoders, so you can sort of customize it any way you want. Someone very nice has actually done that already for Drupal. A guy called Mad Irish. He doesn't use Drupal anymore. I was looking at his site, and one of those sort of people that had a bad experience with Drupal. Don't like Drupal anymore, so he doesn't do it. But thankfully, he did leave his Drupal decoder on his website, and it's kind of, you can think of it as almost like a contrib module. It's just an XML file. OSSEC is pretty much all XML, unfortunately. And I think his decoders are even on the OSSEC website somewhere in the wiki or something. So you can download those, and it basically is able to pass the Drupal watchdog sort of syntax to separate timestamp, IP, and message, and so on. So I just downloaded that, plugged it straight into the system, and it just works. There's an example of it working for those of you who can read it. It might be a bit small. So that's one of the rules that come as part of his decoders. Possible Drupal brute force attack. And it's the typical stuff you'd see in Drupal Watchdog, just someone trying different usernames to break into the site, usually just to post spam. It's the most common cause. And that's a level 10. You can see there's a rule 104130 there. So every rule in OSSEC gets its own little ID. And that ID is the ID of a Drupal brute force attack. And there's another one that is specifically just for the admin user. Lots of different things like that. So through a system like this, you can then teach OSSEC that if that rule happens and it's a level 10 sort of alert, take some sort of action. By default, you'll get an email that looks just like that, pretty much. as well as Drupal issues and attacks. OSSEC is good at just detecting general sort of problems. It sort of has an idea of what a problem might look like, often based on the actual message. So it probably picked up general error here. This is a MySQL block wait timeout issue. It's like very common of a very busy Drupal site that doesn't have adequate measures in place, kind of like a stampede, basically, of too much activity. So with a message like that, OSSEC will let you know, and you might start thinking, maybe I need to use the memcache locking system instead of the semaphore table, or maybe I've got a bigger problem, who knows. But yeah, that's an example of OSSEC sort of going, something's going wrong. It's the rule 1002, unknown problem somewhere on the system. And of course you get the very common PHP memory limit exhaustion. So if you do a deployment, then you start getting a heap of those all of a sudden, and you weren't previously, then you might have a problem. None of these are things that you couldn't get out of syslog yourself. It's just that nobody's actively looking at logs. That's what I learned. I certainly am not, even though I'm pretty OCD about that sort of thing. It's better to be told about problems than scour lots of OK messages for one problem. It just doesn't work. So as I started to use OSSEC, I started seeing these sorts of things going, gee, I can get a lot more out of this than just attacks. Everything is a DNS problem, the famous saying, cannot connect to memcache, okay. This one below happened just the other day. That was that Linode London lost all of its DNS functionality. And we discovered that a site was using Brightcove, which obviously does some sort of server-side HTTP request, much like Mollem, which was also bleeping crazily at the time, and saying, look, loading Brightcove video fails. So all this sort of functionality that this client expected of their site to work just wasn't working anymore. And this was an ISO 27001 Drupal shop that I'm working with, so that has to go into the incident register. A lot of paperwork, a bit ridiculous really, but useful to know about these things other than going, what's going on? I don't understand why this isn't working. Then remembering the logs. So that's log analysis. On to syscheck. It's a bit more straightforward. It's what's changed? As opposed to being real time, which is what all the log analysis stuff is, syscheck runs kind of on a scheduled basis every 22 hours or something, I think it is. And it'll just scan your system, build up that record of files and their sort of MD5 sums or SHA-1 sums. And then once those files change, it'll go, oh, that's, the checksum is different, and send you an email about it. It doesn't sound very useful, but can be if for some reason the SSH binary has changed and you didn't patch it. Oh, that's interesting. Might have a problem. You do get a lot of false positives if you are a good person and are regularly patching. So hopefully you get a lot of things about binary, notifications about binaries changing, but it's because you just patched the previous day or something. So there is a bit of noise. You have to find the balance between what's too noisy and develops monitoring fatigue, and you just stop reading the emails because you don't have time, and what's actually useful. You can ignore certain files if they're changing all the time and that's normal. Like my entire /etc Puppet directory on my Puppet master. I'm changing stuff in Puppet all the time. That's already in Git. I don't need to have more diffs about what's changing there. By default, OSSEC will stop alerting you after the third change, I think. So if a file's changed 3 times, you don't get notifications after that. And I think that's to avoid the monitoring fatigue noise issue. I turn that off.
So, I was going to say in a certain period of time, or?
No, that's it.
Okay.
And so from that point on, if you get hacked, you might not. Yeah, I'd rather have it on and deal with the noise personally, than find out later that I've got a big problem. The other thing it does, I think syscheck does this, or it might be another component of OSSEC, is it does. It watches netstat for ports that open and close. So any new services that start and stop, you might get a notification about that. yeah, there's an example of the SSH statement changing. So the size has changed of this actual binary file. It's grown somewhat. And yeah, the checksums are different. Hopefully that's because I patched it very recently. If not, I've got a big problem. Hackers love to drop in malware versions of SSH. So you go in, you type your password, and that's like siphoning that info silently and sending it somewhere. And there's the netstat example. So suddenly we've got port 5666 listening. Don't panic, that's my NRPE Nagios agent. But as you can see in the previous output, my SSH is no longer running. Port 22 is not visible in the current netstat output, so something's happened there. You've either stopped it deliberately, or maybe you've pushed a bad SSH config to Puppet, thinking that's going to be fine, and then Puppet's come along, deployed your new SSH config, restarted SSH, and failed silently. That sort of thing can be useful to know. Root check. There really isn't much else to say about syscheck. That's basically all there is. Root check. Who left the door open? A back door, perhaps. So it is very much like Rootkit Hunter. I like Rootkit Hunter as well. I use it as well as OSSEC on the same servers. I find, like a doctor, it's good to have a second opinion. They're meant to do the same thing, but they've got different knowledge about different rootkits, and they can do different sort of stuff. Fortunately, I've not had an actual real rootkit detected by OSSEC, hopefully because I don't have any actual rootkits. So yeah, hopefully, like me, you get a lot more false positives if you install this. These are some examples. First one looks like a temp table in MySQL. For some reason, OSSEC thinks that's a possible kernel-level rootkit. Nice way to start making my heart beat a bit faster. The bottom one's an example of a bit of a bug. That's actually from my MacBook. It's complaining that there's hidden files under var temp launch D. I don't even know what that means, but there is a ticket about that with OSSEC. So some operating systems might report more false positives than others, basically. And OSX is one of them. One thing rootcheck does that Rootkit Hunter doesn't is this sort of thing. Detects if a file is owned by root and has writable permissions to anyone, or 777 on a file. Rootcheck will actually send you an email about that, going, "Oh, that's not good." And I've seen that more often than I care to say. And not just in Drupal, not just poor practice in Drupal, but I've installed Ruby gems, and suddenly it's just deployed a gem somewhere on my system with like 777. What's going on? Yeah, it just came like that. The new relic logs, one of the new relic logs is chmod 666 and owned by root. It's just a log file, but rootcheck goes, "Oh, what's going on there?" Because nothing needs to be writable by everyone and owned by root. Just doesn't need to happen. Now, active response is probably my favorite feature, and also my most hated feature, if that's possible. Because it's really cool, but you can do a lot of damage with it. Active response is all about dealing with problems like this most commonly. So your typical web crawler in your logs. This is a new one that's actually been coming out. The top one there is June 28th. It's a sort of new crawler I haven't seen before. It's actually trying to read a potential SSH private key of my www data user. So I don't know who's been deploying, who's been putting SSH private keys in var www, which is usually the home directory of your www data user on Debian or Ubuntu. I deploy with Jenkins and Agar and stuff and SSH agent. But that's interesting. If you're doing that, be aware of that. Because I haven't seen it work, but maybe a crawler is able to extract an SSH private key like that. Cheeky bugger. The bottom is much more common, so you got things crawling for vulnerable phpMyAdmin installations that haven't been locked down properly or are out of date. So you get a lot of this sort of thing in OSSEC, and you probably didn't realize just how much of this sort of thing happens on your servers round the clock. And that sort of thing just annoys me. Plus, there's worse things but that annoys me. Most of them are crawlers like that are pretty harmless. You know, I don't have phpMyAdmin sitting around like that. You probably don't either. But the fact is you're human, right? So you might make a mistake at some point. You might half deploy something and forget about it. Or you might you might not be tracking new versions of phpMyAdmin or something. Or Piwik, the analytics, that's another good example. So you don't really need machines which are more sort of efficient than you are finding your mistakes. And you can even argue that on busy sites where you're kind of desperate for every last HTTP connection to be given to your real users so that no one's getting socket timeouts, you know, you don't need crawlers using up your HTTP connections, madly trying to find vulnerabilities. If you're using like Keep Alive or something is on in Apache, you know, a crawler makes a connection to your site, that connection gets held open for a period of time. There's potential that no one else can use that open socket during that period. Don't let them waste your time, basically, is my point. And what if they find another hole? That's the thing. I guarantee you there's more holes to come in Drupal core. There's probably some that exist right now, we don't know. And you know, it doesn't matter how fast you patch. There's 0 days come out all the time, where maybe there's vulnerabilities that the bad guys know about that no one else does yet. There's a whole market for that sort of thing.
Before they're announced.
That's right. The old 0 day. So people make money that way. Nasty people. So don't wait for it to happen because it's a real pain in the ass to be on the other side of that problem, like I was in November 2012. So, active response in its most common form is the firewall drop script, which comes with OSSEC. So if you ever use something like fail to ban, it's very similar. It's basically reacting to a certain pattern in the logs and just blocking the IP address, usually for a defined period, so usually a limited amount of time, 10 minutes or something, but you can set that to be whatever you want. And it doesn't have to be a firewall drop script. You can make it do other stuff. I don't know. Maybe
Ping flood.
Yeah, ping flood. I don't know. Maybe you're really paranoid. Just shut down your server. I don't know. No more for anybody. That's it.
I've seen one which actually flips the site upside down.
Oh, that's good. I've done that on April Fools before, actually. Yeah, in an office. The other cool thing is it can employ repeat offender mode. So if that attacker gets blocked for 10 minutes, comes back and does more of the same, block them for 30 minutes. They come back again, block them for an hour, and so on. You can sort of exponentially keep punishing them until they give up. But it's all about mitigating that risk, right? The attacker's best weapon is the time between when they get in and when you notice. And it might be days like it was for me, or it might be like those recent cases that we've seen with eBay and so on, where months have gone by where no one noticed. They're not running something like OSSEC. Cannot believe it.
Does it do that out of curiosity? Does it just write IP tables rules? Or?
Yeah, the firewall drop script by default will just put an IP tables rule in. It is capable of using other types of firewalls. The other ones, having a mental blank, Pete. Other common Linux firewalls.
Is the old UFW?
Yeah, UFW is another one.
What happens if the attacker fakes the package header uses fakes or something?
It can only do as best job as it possibly can. Yeah, if the attacker is smart enough to be sort of faking the IP address, which is possible.
Yeah, that's a lot of software.
Yeah, I don't think OSSEC would be able to detect that, but maybe that's when you can write a different script that can try and deal with that in different ways. I don't know. I can't think of any way off the top of my head, but.
Or I mean, that kind of stuff, if they're using different IP, you'd be getting the same sorts of requests theoretically. So you do it based on the request.
Because you would that be just throwing stuff at you because you wouldn't be able to respond to them.
Yeah, that's right. And if you've got an attacker that's being that
I
sophisticated,
just wanted to really just do it in our service in that case.
yeah, that's right. So you got bigger problems. Like I said earlier, it's a host-based intrusion detection system, so it's running within your OS. You might be better off with, like at the router level, doing fingerprinting of the actual packets and employing other types of blocking that way. But the really cool thing about active response, what I really like about it, that things like fail to ban I haven't seen do, is that when you're using the server agent model, if any of your servers that happens to be an agent on your network gets an attack, it tells the server, and all of your servers block that IP at the same time. So it's a really nice feature because if you already think that they're nasty, why give them the opportunity to scour around the rest of your infrastructure? A lot of attackers deliberately target the same sort of subnet as well. If your servers happen to be within the same subnet, there's a good chance that that attack is on its way towards the other machines. So block them everywhere. And that's why I really like active response. It's also why I really don't like active response, because I've locked myself out before. Every one of my systems, all my SSH sessions, hey, what's going on? I've even gone so far as to send a support ticket to Linode going, what's going on? You guys are hopeless. Oh, sorry. Problem exists between keyboard and chair, as they say. Head cap. This is another real gotcha in Drupal. If your Drupal sites are behind load balancers or, say, Varnish, speaking of wrong IP addresses in the request, you'll often find if you haven't configured things right, the request as seen by your web servers or Drupal is probably localhost or maybe the local IP of your Varnish server if you're separating them on the LAN. And you don't want OSSEC to be blocking your Varnish server from your Apache server, because then you've locked out all your legitimate traffic. But also, if it's coming up as localhost, OSSEC's probably not going to block 127.0.0.1. I think it's whitelisted out of the box. So it's going to just be ineffective. You're not going to be adequately blocking those attackers. So in Nginx at Apache, you often find you need to be logging the x-forwarded-for IP as the client IP, which is just a log format setting. Many guides online on how to do that. And also in the settings PHP of Drupal, you need to set the reverse proxy addresses there. And that's for the syslog, the watchdog messages from Drupal to log the right IP. So in terms of configuration, I'm not going to do a live demo, by the way, because it's hard to sort of trigger intrusions, and live demos always fail for me. So I'm just going to run through a few things like this. It is XML based, pretty much all of the configuration. This is a typical sort of rule. This is one where I'm matching on, well, I'll describe it from the top. I'm giving it an ID of 100, 112. It's just an arbitrary number. Each rule has a different ID. And I'm saying this is...
How do you stop, like, I assume that no one else should use that ID? Or
no, it's just local to your installation. It doesn't communicate on the network. They just have to all be sort of unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they have like a list of recommended IDs for local?
They sort of do, because in the default configuration they separate syslog rules from Apache rules, and I think the syslogs might be 100s and up, and the Apaches might be 101 or whatever.
Because if you're dragging in rules off the website, you're sharing the rules.
That's right. You can have some clashes. I think you sort of develop your own sort of convention. I haven't grabbed too many rules online other than the Drupal ones. Pretty much everything else I've just written myself.
Is there an alert that tells you the rules are configured?
Well, yeah, OSSEC won't start. It'll go duplicate rule ID or something.
Is OSSEC basically just a daemon that's running? There's no real user interface, I'm guessing.
That's right. Yeah, it's just a collection of different daemons for mainly for each of those features: log check, syscheck, and so on. There is a web interface, or at least there was a web interface. I don't think it's under active development anymore. It doesn't get talked about much. It looks pretty crude from the screenshots I've seen, but it's just mainly XML files that you configure and then just restart there's one main init script, and you just restart it and it does that. So
can I ask a question?
Yep.
Is email the only delivery, or are there any other?
It's the default delivery. It mainly works with emails.
Can you keep the log somewhere else, like sort of have an excerpt of your logs that you...
Does it support SNMP?
Good question. I'm not sure.
Is there like commands, like with varnish, there's a varnish log command where you can sort of
Pass the OSSEC own logs.
Sort of happening and, the logs,
Yeah.
the logs.
Yeah, there is. There's an OSSEC. There's the log test script, but there's also the OSSEC report D, which can sort of interrogate the OSSEC logs itself. Some people have been doing things like shipping the OSSEC logs into Logstash and Elasticsearch, and then putting a Kibana interface over it, which is really, really nice. So you can get a sort of running graph. Yeah, in terms of other than email, I'm not sure. It's mainly around the active response. You can make it execute an arbitrary script in that sense, but it's mainly about email notifications. So that's just an example of a rule, and these are just matches basically. So I'm saying a certain rule came in of 31151, which is the rule for many 40 something errors. 403 is probably access denied. So I'm saying if there was an access denied style rule that was triggered, this is a more explicit sort of rule. I'm saying the program name in the syslog would have started with Drupal, that's the watchdog, or whatever you set as the log facility in syslog for Drupal. And I'm matching on node add, just as an example. So it's a 403 access denied on node add. You know, it's a spam bot hitting my site too much. I still want them blocked, so it was a level 10 up the top. I think anything above level 7 will actually trigger a response by default, an active response. Anything under level 7 might just be a silent sort of flag, or you might get an email but nothing else. But I'm also saying no email alert, probably just because I'm getting hundreds of these, and I need to know that it's working, but I don't need to be notified about it all the time. So I'm trying to show a few different ways of configuring just one rule in OSSEC. You normally would get email alerts, but you can say explicitly, don't email me. And then you can put a little description there just so you understand what the error was. And then, yep.
Can you aggregate them? Can you say I have 10 of those?
I want a summary.
10.
Say, do I get 10 of those, can I get an email? Or?
Yep. I'll get to it, but that's a couple of slides away. This is just another case. 1003 is the message too large alert. That's when there's been a really big syslog message for some reason. Molem is a classic. These massive, verbose, OAuth sort of things whenever a new capture is being retrieved or something. So I'm matching here on, I'm saying level equals 0. It's not actually a problem, so don't do anything. It's just noisy. So level 0 means ignore this sort of problem. And the match is retrieve new capture, which is a common Molem message. And I'm basically saying, ignore. This is stupid. Frequency is the interesting one there. So the top rule we're seeing here is the login attempt failed. You'll get that in a Drupal syslog message. And that can be sometimes not malicious. That can just be a mistake. Someone's forgotten their password, or they're mashing the keyboard, excited about what they're going to do, put the wrong password. So we're saying level 6. It's not really a problem. Don't alert or block them, the poor user. However, if they've put in the wrong password too many times, we've got a frequency of 8, which due to some stupid OSSEC brain damage is actually 10. It sort of logs internally twice for some reason, I think, before it starts counting. Don't ask me why. There's some complicated reason given by the developers. That's just absurd if you ask me.
Miguel, something like cause reasons?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Oh, you're not smart enough to understand, you know. Classic developer sort of response. But yeah, so a frequency of 8, 10, in a time frame of maybe 2 minutes, or you can adjust that to whatever. That's perhaps a brute force attack. It's up to you to judge what that is. Thus, it's a level 10, and we saw an example of that one earlier. Too much, too quickly, get out, essentially. So you can customize that in any number of ways. I even had a client of a customer, so sort of an end shop on the website that the client that I work with built, who didn't want to implement a PDF. I'll start again. Had a service where users can come and log in to his service and download a whole heap of PDFs or something. But he found people were abusing his service. They were downloading too many for what they were paying for or something. He didn't want to pay what the Drupal shop said was going to cost to implement like a counter system in Drupal. But we realized that pretty easily in OSSEC we could do that. We could match on the act of downloading these PDFs by IP. And if they download too many, he was happy enough for us to just block their IP. Which personally I thought was a bit harsh, but the client is always right. So we did that. So there's another example of custom frequency. Yeah, pretty harsh.
Can you block someone's IP just from a page or subset of pages, or are you blocking them from the whole site?
The IP block is kind of across the board, but because
you run a script that did something within your
that's right. Because the active response is you can run a custom script. You might drop in a deny from in your Apache config or something with that path.
Or it might log them out and then you block their account with that one.
Yeah, something like that. Whatever you want, really.
Block IPs table.
Yeah. So in terms of notifications, there's other nice things you can do. For larger shops, I find I'm doing this a fair bit with the developers. We can just collate the OSSEC rules that relate to PHP fatal errors or notices or warnings. I can say just email the developers about those. They don't need to know about SSH daemon being changed in the syscheck stuff. They don't need to know about, well, maybe they do need to know about kernel panics because they might have caused it. Who knows? But yeah, you can alert sysadmins to stuff, and maybe your sysadmins are like 90 sysadmins and they don't care about the actual websites. They don't want to know about PHP or whatever. And I'm finding with ISO 27001 businesses, there's a chief InfoSec officer or manager or whatever, or even a Redmine issue queue, where certain types of alert need to alert someone higher up or go into an incident register, which might be like a Redmine issue queue or something, which can receive emails directly or something. Drop those alerts into the incident register, and we can run a report or something later. Speaking of reports, I mentioned earlier OSSEC Report D, so it's just a tool that can scan the OSSEC logs themselves. The OSSEC logs are really good. They get collated away by year, month, and so on. And so you can sort of pass all those logs with this tool, but ask for specific types of IDs or groups of rules that occurred, and you can start to generate reports like, who tried to log into the site as admin during March for whatever reason, or who were the top 10 users to SSH into the servers. Bob's on holiday. Why did he log in? Is he a workaholic, or has his SSH key been compromised or something, and something we should be aware of, or has someone been fired and then 30 minutes later logged in and run sudo something, and we had one of those in the US, and came and deleted a whole bunch of data, which I won't even go into it because it's being recorded. That was interesting. So what to take from this? There's a few things I want to sort of point out. The main thing is no mysteries. And what I found was when this server got hacked in 2012, beyond everything else, it was the fact that it was a surprise that bothered me the most, especially being a sysadmin. I don't like surprises. I'm a know-it-all. I want to know everything that's happening on my servers. I just, can't stand mysteries. And so the biggest thing that I took from OSSEC was not intrusions as such, but it was having the oversight of all my infrastructure with something like OSSEC, letting me know when there's problems, particularly things like network outages, where sometimes I was aware of like routing problems between hosting providers or so on before they did, and just sort of being able to be on the ball and really quickly able to diagnose issues. And the fundamental thing being I am human, mostly, and I don't watch logs all the time. So better to have something tell you when things are going wrong. And you do make mistakes. You do things that can become security problems. Machines are really good at kicking your ass over that sort of thing because they don't care. And I've already sort of said that. The instant awareness of what's happening on the infrastructure, who's logging in, who's doing what, without it being too noisy, is just a really nice thing to have. More of the same, really. Knowledge is power. Not everything is a risk. There's a lot of things that go wrong that can impact, if we've sort of gone over some of the examples, but if your memory isn't tuned or something in MySQL and so on, you're getting out of memory panics and stuff. These are things you need to be aware of, at least if you're sort of doing operational stuff or you're wondering why your site isn't working. And I mentioned this earlier as well, but the element of surprise is the adversary's weapon, the time between them doing something and you knowing about it. That's the opportunity for them to do what's called pivoting, looking for other stuff they can get into from that location. What data can they siphon away? So if you've got your finger on the pulse, it's much harder to actually have that surprise element. And you might be able to mitigate some serious risk. Finally, OSSEC is not meant to be perfect. I've mentioned a few times, I'm going backwards, but first of all, there are false positives. There often is a bit of noise. I don't like XML very much, and I found that some of the rules and learning some of that syntax of rules can be a bit of a learning curve. Sometimes the documentation is inconsistent or just has to do in sections, which isn't very useful, but the mailing lists are good. It is software based, so if you're running it on a VPS, there's other vectors of attack, like if your hosting company gets hacked and someone is sitting there on the hypervisor level copying away the blocks of your virtual disk that runs your server, OSSEC's not going to be able to help you there. So there are other solutions. There's network intrusion detection systems which sit usually higher up the stack. Sometimes anyway. There are things like Security Onion, Bro, and Splunk. These are things that are better at analyzing packets. You take Heartbleed, for example, in April. OSSEC not so good at detecting that, although I have had a huge upshoot of TLS Prober bot scanning my SSL sites, which happens to be related to Heartbleed, but there's other services like Bro which are better at watching the actual packets and detecting things. On the other hand, they accumulate vast amounts of disk space to do so, so it's not always practical to...
Also, if you're hosting somewhere like Linux, you're not going to have the opportunity to install that stuff, really.
Not really. Some of these do actually can run on the OS, but again, you've still got that same problem like the third point there. So, yeah, there are other solutions, web app firewalls and stuff. Big Five says, all right, here are my actual tips. Filter out the noise. The 1002 error, the unknown problem, they're the ones that you get the most of. The rookie mistake in OSSEC seems to be, oh, that's nothing, that's not a problem. I'm just going to write a rule that says if SID 1002 level equals 0, ignore all 1002s, basically. I'll never hear any problem again, it's great. But you often want to know about 1002s. They're all your MySQL issues, your PHP memory limits, kernel panics, stuff that doesn't match other things. Whenever you've got a rule that doesn't actually matter, you write a specific rule for that pattern, that message that you saw in the log.
Like, be fine-grained as possible.
Yeah, and you ignore that one. You keep getting 1002s and you gradually whitelist them. You gradually tune them down. Whitelist your IPs, all of your IPs, Don't get yourself locked out. Whitelist the interconnectivity between app and DB server if they're different IPs. And as I said, run defense in depth. So there's other systems you can use. Network intrusion detection systems, web app firewalls. They're a bit higher level for what most of us here probably would do. It's more what you'd ask your hosting provider to look at if they can. I run RK Hunter for rootkits as well. I run ClamAV, routine virus scans. That would have straight away pulled up that PHP backdoor. If I was running that once a day on var.dub, I would have noted about it straight away, kicking myself. Never again. That's it really. Resources. These slides are on my website. Websites, mailing lists. There's some good tips there. That's Matt Irish's Drupal Decoders. There's an OSSEC book. It's a little bit out of date now. It's maybe 2 years old, but most of it is still valid in terms of syntax. If you really want to get into reading books about OSSEC. And the bottom are just tips from my own site. Logging different syslog identity for each Drupal site. You can do that in your Drupal settings for the syslog. I think it's called log facility, and then a sort of name that you can give to separate your sites from others. I found it makes sense to prefix them all with Drupal dash something, and then you can match rules that affect multiple sites.
Drupal, yeah.
For a while, I had like every site had a completely unique name, and then it made no sense to have duplicate rules in OSSEC for the same thing, just matching on different program name. So all my rules match on Drupal, starts with Drupal something when it's a syslog, a watchdog message. And that's just my install script, which just expedites some of that process, the default process. But, yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Sorry, you said, whitelist your own IPs. What do you do when you know you're going to be on, a wireless network where you don't know what the IP address is? Do you take it through another machine?
Yeah, I run a VPN. So I've got like a Linode running OpenVPN, and I'll either have specific routes to route specific traffic through that VPN, or these days I route all my traffic through the VPN for paranoia reasons. Otherwise, yeah, you're in trouble if you use Tor or something like that for all your traffic.
Just create a piece of search tunnel.
Yeah.
No, I was just wondering.
Any sort of tunnel.
Something I've run into before, and
Yeah.
that was like tunnel through something.
Yeah. So, Pete?
Do you know if there's a pop-up module to generate rules?
To generate rules?
Generate the XML rule files.
Ooh, no, I don't.
And starting them out.
You've inspired me now. I don't know if there is, but that would be really neat, because it does get really tedious writing these great big chunks of XML. It may exist. I never thought of it till now. Thanks. Damn.
Get the notifications through your phone?
Not OSSEC, just because there is a little bit too much noise.
Right.
My phone notifications still remain Nagios and that sort of thing. Yeah. You could if you're a real masochist. Or if you're blocking 1002, you could.
The agent, can that be installed on a standard user account? I realise the active response stuff wouldn't do, but monitoring like a queer host.
Okay.
And stuff.
Probably not. By default, it will try and add a specific user of OSSEC, so it assumes you have to run the install script as root.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this looks really good. I'm pretty sure this can be installed tomorrow. I had two questions. One, it strikes me that this, like, for lack of a better word, seems almost like a consumer antivirus with servers. Has something like this ever existed before?
I dare say it would. I'm just thinking of examples such as, where have I got it? Things like Security Onion, or Security Onion is kind of a suite of products. It actually includes OSSEC itself, but a bunch of other tools. I can't remember some of the other names, probably Bro as well. I'm reading a book at the moment about network intrusion detection systems, and a lot of them have been around, invented by the military, basically, and that's where it all kind of started. I'm sure there's other solutions. What appealed to me about OSSEC was it was open source, and I think there's a lot of, like, Splunk costs money. You have to buy licenses. I understand it can get quite expensive. So something like OSSEC is just GPL. You can just download it and run it anywhere.
The other question I have is there any sort of, like, is there any sort of range in terms of like how big the server is that you should be running this on? Like, for example, for a very small server, I think it's necessary to have it on. For a very large server with lots of traffic, is it going to just cause too much in terms of notifications?
I don't think so. I think there's two things. I think even a small server carries most of these risks because a lot of these risks aren't about the server or they're about the website, they're about the OS or they're about the people working on that server and the mistakes they might make. So I think there's definitely, OSSEC can be installed on anything, even on a Mac. In terms of, I guess the other part of that question is, on a small server, does it carry a really large footprint, perhaps, in terms of memory? No. I was actually really surprised. It's really, really lightweight. I can't think of how much memory it consumes, but it's really, really small. The one thing I will say is that if your disks are slow, so if you've got high latency disks for whatever reason, or like Lino is nice and fast, but I've seen like the first generation Rackspace servers, the disks are slow enough that when syscheck does its scan, it can be really I/O intensive, and it can cause a lot of load. Actually, yeah, there are cases like that where, but that might not be a small server, it might just be like infrastructure issue. What was the other thing I was going to say about that?
I think what you're talking about there is potentially two different types of vulnerability risks.
Yeah.
On a high traffic server, then you've probably got a higher chance of a DDoS. But on a small server, there's just as much chance of someone trying to compromise it to get onto other systems as what you would on a big server. So
yeah, that was sort of
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think.
Yeah, it's just that threshold. Like, at what point, if you're managing a very small site, like a few hundred users going onto the website, is it necessary to have that?
Yeah, I think it is only because even a small site might have that vulnerable CK editor on it. I'll even go as far, it might sound a bit unfair, but from my experience, I've seen some of the smaller servers running the mum and pop websites are sometimes the ones that get neglected in terms of patching because they matter a bit less. The client's not paying as much money. It's not always the case, but it can happen. Whereas the big client with the load-balanced cluster of 8 servers is probably paying you enough to not be patching them regularly because they're probably a scary client. You don't want to be caught not doing it. So it's for peace of mind, I would consider dropping it in.
I've got a really good example of how something like this could have helped a client of mine. Was we picked up a site that we didn't develop, and we just basically kept it running. And then all of a sudden it was going really slow, and I used is it my top or something?
Yep.
MySQL top, and I found that basically someone was automatically generating users on a site that should only have had maybe 2 or 3 accounts because it's only a couple of editors, but whoever developed it hadn't turned off account registration.
So inherently
DDoS the site just by creating users, Once I found it, I turned that off, and it was fine. But
that's true, yeah.
This could have been looking for something like that. That stopped it from happening.
Inheriting code bases.
Scary.
Yeah, it's a good example. And I should say also, I'm saying syscheck can cause problems. What I didn't go through is the installation process gives you the choice of what to enable. So go, do you want to run log analysis? Yes. Do you want to run syscheck? Maybe not. Do you want to run active response? I said no for a long time because I was scared. And rightfully scared, I locked myself out. But I say yes these days. But yeah, you do have fine-grained control of what feature sets you turn on.
How much of your configs are your own, and do you share any of them?
I haven't shared any actually. I kind of run with the defaults and then just tweak, add rules. Haven't really thought about contributing those back, but probably could. There's a wiki on the OSSEC website with a lot of shared stuff. The Drupal ones are an example. I think out of the box it comes with WordPress stuff. Someone should get Drupal in there. by default as well.
Does it integrate with any network management system like AEOS or Xerox?
No, not that I've seen, unless you're doing things like, unless your email notifications turn into something else, which I've seen some people do, but I haven't seen any.
I guess those systems can consume email.
Yeah. I run both, and so I'll often get an Argos alert and go, what was that? And before I even check the server, I look at my OSSEC. Suddenly I've got 80 OSSEC emails that might explain what's just happened.
How do you deal with the emails?
I'm OCD. I tell myself I must read them. I just remind myself of how it felt to get hacked. The people that I work with who also get them filter them and don't read them. So they're not like me. It is hard. Like you have to.
No, I mean, if you filter things down, how can you get that so you're basically not getting alerts unless something's going wrong?
Yeah. Ideally, I might get maybe, I might get 20 a day or something, and to me that's tolerable. Sometimes I might have 120 or something.
How many servers are you talking about that you're getting that many from?
60 or more. I'm thinking of that one client. Yeah.
Oh, no,
so it's still not bad.
Low.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you've only got a couple of servers. I'm not going to get way more.
The most annoying one is when like a client puts a site into maintenance mode or something, and all the Google bots coming in are triggering 503s, and you're getting lots. The other thing you can do in OSSEC is group alerts into an email, so you can say, if I've had a real flood of notifications come through, maybe 20, just wait a bit and sort of collate them up, build them up in the background. Yeah, they send like a digest, or you can get them explicitly to come individually. Sometimes I prefer that because the time matters. I might not have some things are too risky to wait for that to accumulate. So, but there's a lot of flexibility. Any other questions or pub? No, more. You got a couple more questions
I've got a couple of things I need
to show? Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.